A night guard job with a big salary sounds like a boring adult decision. Until you realize you're clocking in at a museum where the artifacts feel like they're watching you breathe. And that's the core question that Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia 2026 keeps poking at. What happens when the most invisible worker in the building becomes the only thing standing between a sleepy city and something ancient, hungry, and very awake? Welcome back to Flick Flare. And yeah, I watched this one with the lights slightly brighter than usual. If you like reviews that get into the texture of a show, the mood, the messy choices, the little details that make you lean forward, hang out with me for a bit. If you end up enjoying this kind of drama breakdown, consider subscribing. No pressure. Just helps you find your way back here. And spoiler-wise, I'm going moderate. I'll talk about the premise turns and how the story moves, but I'm not going to try to reveal the endgame, especially because the hook of this drama is the experience of discovering the secret alongside Sam. So the setup is clean and immediately relatable. Sam takes a night security job at an old museum because the pay is good. That alone is already a tiny character statement. This isn't some chosen one warrior raised by monks or whatever. This is a guy doing math in his head, rent, bills, life, and deciding that a weird building at night is worth it. I loved that grounding because it gives the supernatural stuff a friction point. When the magic hits, it hits someone with tired eyes and practical instincts, not a hero who's been rehearsing speeches. The museum itself is introduced like a character with posture. Even if the storyline summary doesn't spell out specific rooms or artifact names, the show's whole vibe leans into that old place energy. History stacked so thick you can almost taste dust in the air. The camera language, and I'm speaking generally here, because the feeling is consistent even when the plot details stay guarded, is all about distance and corners. Long hallways that make Sam look small, glass cases that reflect his face back at him, and shadows that don't feel like empty space, they feel occupied. Here's where it grabbed me. The first night tension isn't played like a cheap haunted house. It's played like a job. Sam's not sprinting around screaming. He's doing rounds, checking locks, listening to the building settle. And that's so much scarier because it makes you pay attention to mundane sounds. A latch, a distant hum, the little click of a flashlight button. The show knows that if it can make you anxious about a normal hallway, it can make you anxious about anything. And then, this is the hinge of the whole series. Sam accidentally repairs an ancient statue. And in that moment, he gains a mysterious power that permanently changes his life. That's a deliciously specific choice. Not he finds a glowing gem, not a wizard appears, but he fixes something. That matters. It frames Sam as someone who restores, who patches, who makes do. The show basically says his power comes through care, not conquest. And I'm not kidding, that one angle made me instantly more forgiving of later messiness, because it's thematically rich in a way a lot of secret power dramas aren't. Now let me slow down and paint the mini scene the way the show wants you to feel it, because this is where the atmosphere locks in. Sam's alone, and the museum at night has that unnatural clarity where everything looks too still, like the air itself is holding. He notices something off about the statue, something broken or misaligned. He gets closer, not because he's brave, but because it's his job. His hands are careful, slightly unsure, like he's trying not to set off an alarm. The sound design goes tight here. You hear his breath, the faint scrape of material, the soft shift of weight as he leans in. And then there's this beat, this micropause, where the show lets you think nothing's going to happen, right? Before it does. When the power hits, it doesn't feel like a fireworks display. It feels like crossing a line you can't uncross. The camera lingers just long enough on Sam's face to sell the shock. Eyes widening, I'm fine, is the kind of thing that makes supernatural premises feel oddly intimate. But let me throw a question in here, because this is where I think the drama quietly challenges you. If Sam's power comes from repairing history, what does it cost him to keep doing it? Because the show hints hard that this isn't a gift with a cute training montage. It's a life rewrite. One of the biggest get shorter. The soundscape changes from hollow quiet to tight, pressurized noise. Even if we keep the plot's specifics vague, because I'm not inventing what artifact does what, the sensation is consistent. The threats feel like they come from deep time. Like the museum isn't just displaying history, it's storing it, and some of it wants out. Let's talk visuals, because this drama lives and dies on its ability to make a museum feel like a battlefield without turning it into a generic horror hallway. The lighting design is doing a lot of work. Night scenes aren't just dark. They're layered. Glass reflections slice frames into pieces. Spotlights on exhibits create these little islands of brightness surrounded by black. Sam moves between them like he's crossing zones of safety and danger, and listening and choosing whether to turn his head. Here's another rehook, because I think this is where the show either wins you or loses you. Does it actually earn Sam becoming the only one who can protect the city? Or does it just declare it and move on? For me, it mostly earns it through vulnerability rather than lore. Sam's arc, based on what we're given, isn't about becoming. Music and sound design deserve their own little moment because this drama understands restraint. It doesn't drown every scene in ominous strings. Sometimes it lets the museum's natural soundscape be the score. Ventilation hum, distant creaks, the soft thud of footsteps on different flooring. When music does swell, it tends to feel like a warning rather than a celebration. And I appreciated that because it keeps the power from feeling like a superhero flex. The show seems committed to the idea that this ability is heavy. It has a cost, even if the storyline summary doesn't spell out exactly what that cost is in mechanical terms. Okay, tiny humorous aside, because my brain did this every episode. If someone offered me a big salary to work alone in a museum at night, I would need at least 3 additional benefits. A museum is concrete. The loneliness is concrete. There's a short language the drama leans on. Sam small against grand exhibits, Sam reflected in glass, Sam framed by doorways. That makes the threat feel personal before it feels global. And that's the right move, because end-of-the-world stakes are cheap if you don't first make me care about one person's Tuesday night. Another rehook for you. What if the real villain isn't even a specific artifact, but the idea that the past is never truly past? This show plays with that in a way that's more uncomfortable than flashy. Theme-wise, the hidden for hundreds of years secret isn't just lore bait. It suggests generational consequences. The museum, by definition, is where we put what we've decided is worth preserving, while also deciding what stays behind glass and what stays unspoken. So when the drama says, threats emerge from behind the artifacts, I hear a metaphor loud and clear. Suppressed history doesn't stay quiet. And Sam, the night guard, is the one forced to deal with it because he's the one physically present when the building stops pretending. That's why I keep coming back to the show's class subtext. A museum is a public institution, sure, but it's also a prestige space. People come in the day, take photos, feel cultured, then leave. The night staff deals with what's left behind. Conceptually, have a clean escalation. Sam gets the job, discovers the secret, gains the power, and then the threats start to show themselves. After that, the story breathes more. It cycles through dread, action, aftermath, and then that quiet return to routine, because he still has to do the job. That back-to-work rhythm is either going to hypnotize you or frustrate you depending on what you want from a supernatural drama. I'm personally a sucker for the routine becomes horror as structure, so I vibed with it. There's something uniquely haunting about a character who can't just quit. Even if, logically, you're screaming, bro, resign. The show makes it emotionally plausible that he doesn't. Money matters. Pride matters. And once you've seen what's behind the museum's surface, leaving doesn't mean you're safe. It might just mean you're unprepared. And yes, I did find myself annoyed in a couple spots where the drama leans on coincidence. The inciting incident is already an accident. Sam, without meaning to, repairs the statue. That's fine. That's the point. But when the story keeps relying on, and then Sam happens to be there when, too many times, you start to feel the writer's hand nudging pieces into place. The better moments are when the drama makes Sam's choices the trigger, when his decision to investigate, to fix, to protect, to stay silent actively shapes the danger. The cinematography helps smooth over those bumps because it's very good at building anticipation. Even a simple shot of Sam walking past displays can feel loaded when the camera holds a beat too long on an artifact, like it's listening. The editing is also patient, sometimes daringly so. It lets scenes end on silence instead of a punchline. It trusts you to sit in discomfort. That's not a mainstream choice, and I respect it. Sound design, again, keeps sneaking up on you. There's a specific kind of quiet in this drama that feels engineered. Not emptiness, but suppression. Like the museum is actively holding something down. And when that suppression slips, when something stirs behind glass or in shadow, the audio doesn't always spike. Sometimes it thins out instead, making you lean in. That's such a smart trick. Loud is easy. Thin is unsettling. Another personal confession. There's a moment, more like a recurring feeling, where Sam stands alone in a vast room and you can tell he's calculating whether he could outrun whatever might happen. That feeling hit me in the stomach. Not because I fought ancient powers in a museum, sadly not on my resume, but because I recognize that mental math of fear. The if this goes wrong, what's my exit? Instinct. The show nails that survival realism. Now, since we don't have explicit details about how the power works, I'm going to talk about it in terms of how the drama frames it emotionally. The power is depicted as transformative, and not in a purely empowering way. It's not just cool, now I'm strong. It's I'm different now, and I can't go back. Those are very different fantasies. The drama seems far more interested in the second one. It keeps returning to the fact that Sam didn't consent to become a guardian, he consented to become a guard. And the more the threats emerge, the more the story leans into moral pressure. If only Sam can protect the city, what happens when he's exhausted? When he doubts himself? When he gets hurt? When he wonders if protecting people who don't even know he exists is worth losing his own life to something ancient and relentless? That's where the drama gets juicy, because it's not about can he win, it's about can he keep choosing this. Here's a rehook that matters for the whole experience. Is this a superhero story disguised as a horror thriller, or a horror thriller disguised as a superhero story? Because your enjoyment depends on which one you want it to be. I'll tell you where I land. At least, so far, it's more of a mood-driven supernatural thriller with heroic elements than a straightforward power fantasy. The city-saving angle is present, but the show's heart is in the museum's corridors at 3 a.m., where bravery looks like continuing your rounds even though your instincts are screaming at you to go home. And I appreciate that the drama doesn't immediately turn Sam into a swaggering protector. If anything, it makes him more careful, more hesitant, more aware of fragility. That's a performance challenge, playing someone who is powerful but doesn't feel powerful. And it's handled with a lot of small choices. A pause before touching an object, a glance over the shoulder, the way Sam's posture changes when he's alone versus when he's in a public-facing space. If I had one craft critique that kept popping up, it's that the show sometimes flirts with repetition in its scare rhythm. Quiet hallway, artifact emphasis, slight disturbance, Sam reacting, aftermath. When you do that pattern too consistently, the viewer starts predicting the beats. The fix would be simple: vary the shape of the tension. Sometimes let nothing happen. Sometimes let something happen in a brightly lit space. Sometimes make the danger emotional instead of physical. The show does vary it sometimes, and those are the episodes or stretches that feel the most alive. But even when it repeats, the mood is strong enough that I didn't bail. And that's not nothing. A lot of dramas with a great premise lose you because they can't sustain the vibe. This one sustains the vibe. It's committed to the museum as a living threat environment, and that commitment buys it patience. One thing I also found interesting is how the drama positions repair as both the inciting act and a kind of character mirror. Sam repairs a statue and becomes the protector. But the more he protects, the more broken he risks becoming. Sleep, relationships, sense of normalcy, safety. The show invites you to wonder, is he repairing the boundary between past and present? Or is he just becoming the patch over a wound that will never really? Also going to give the show credit for not over-explaining the museum's hundreds of years secret right away, at least conceptually. Mystery is part of the flavor. You're meant to feel like you're brushing up against something older than you can understand. When the drama leans into that, it feels mythic. When it leans too hard, it risks feeling vague. That's the tightrope. And I'd say it walks it more often than it falls. But yeah, you'll wobble with it. And I know some viewers will want more concrete lore faster. I get it. I'm usually that person. But here's my surprising take. I think the show's refusal to fully gamify the power is what keeps it airy. Once you can measure the magic, it becomes safe. This drama wants the power to feel unsafe, even to Sam. It wants you to worry that every time he uses it, he's nudging something awake. If you're coming into this expecting a clean, shiny superhero arc, you might bounce. If you come into it wanting a show that lets silence do work, that treats hallways like psychological spaces, and that makes heroism feel like a lonely job rather than a victory lap, you'll probably lock in. And I want to zoom back to Sam's initial motivation, money, because that's where the show's emotional irony lies. The big salary is what pulls him into the museum. But once he has the power and the threats start emerging, the salary almost becomes irrelevant. Not because money doesn't matter anymore, but because the stakes have shifted so violently that the paycheck feels like a cruel joke. He wanted financial stability, he got cosmic responsibility. There's something darkly funny about that in a laugh, so you don't cry way. Speaking of crying, okay, not crying, but you know what I mean. There's a particular emotional note the show hits that I didn't expect. Shame. Not, I did something wrong. But I can't tell anyone what I'm doing. The shame of secrecy, the shame of being unseen. The show frames heroism as something that can erode your sense of self if you don't have mirrors, people who reflect you back, who validate that you exist. Sam doesn't have that, at least not in any way the provided storyline confirms, so the drama leans into internal validation, which is fragile. The way the museum is filmed reinforces that fragility. Glass cases create literal barriers. Sam is always separated from the objects, even when he's near them. And that's such a neat visual metaphor. He can protect history, he can touch its consequences, but he can't truly belong to the world that celebrates it. He's staff. He's night. He's the unseen layer. Another thing the show does well is making the threats feel like they come with intent, not randomness. Deadly threats emerging from behind artifacts could easily turn into silly chaos if handled poorly. Here, the vibe suggests consequence. Like the artifacts aren't just cursed for fun, they're connected to the secret. That helps the story feel cohesive even when individual sequences vary. Now, I'm being careful not to invent specific plot beats, but I can talk about how the drama uses escalation. It starts intimate, Sam and the statue. Then it expands, Sam and the museum. Then it expands again, Sam and the city. That widening circle is a classic structure, and it's effective because it mirrors Sam's loss of control. He can't keep the problem contained to his shift anymore. His life stops being work and starts being mission, whether he likes it or not. And that's where the tension gets delicious. Sam doesn't get to clock out emotionally. The museum might be his workplace, but the power is now inside him. That's body horror adjacent in a quiet way. The show doesn't have to show grotesque transformation to make you feel the violation of change. It can just show Sam standing still, realizing that even if he leaves the museum doesn't leave him. Let me touch on dialogue style, because it matters for on-camera vibe. The drama's writing, at least in spirit, is not overly quippy. It doesn't rely on constant matter because the premise is wild. You need to see a human mind catching up. The micro expressions, eye scanning, jaw tightening, a swallow before stepping forward, sell the reality of fear better than any CGI could. The museum cinematography also plays a game with symmetry. You get these composed shots where everything is orderly, aligned, curated. And then you feel the disorder underneath. It's a visual contradiction that matches the story's premise. Curated history versus living threat. Sound-wise, I can't stop praising the use of silence. Silence is the museum's natural habitat. The show doesn't fight that. It weaponizes it. When a sound finally breaks through, a shift, a scrape, a thud, it feels like an intrusion. And Sam's job is literally to respond to intrusions. That alignment between premise and sound design is just smart. I also want to point out a subtle emotional trick. Because Sam is alone so much at night, the show makes you hyper-attuned to his body in space. The way he walks, the distance between him and the next doorway, the time it takes him to cross a room. That suspense you can measure with your own breath. If the show had packed every minute with plot, you'd lose that embodied tension. Now, if I sound like I'm gushing, remember, I'm still mixed overall. My biggest frustration is that sometimes the story leans on the mysterious secret label without giving you enough concrete emotional information about what Sam wants beyond survival. Money gets him in the door, sure. Protecting the city becomes his responsibility, sure. But what does he crave? Normal life? Recognition? Redemption? Peace? The show hints, but it doesn't always clarify, and that can make the middle stretches feel like they're floating on vibes alone. But here's the thing, vibes are not nothing, especially in a drama whose primary selling point is atmosphere. If you're the kind of viewer who loves getting lost in a setting, this museum will swallow you whole. And if you're the kind of viewer who needs clean plot mechanics, you might find yourself checking the runtime and going, okay, but where are we going? Another rehook. And this one is personal. Did the show ever make me feel like Sam might actually quit? Because if quitting never feels possible, the tension can flatten. The best suspense includes the temptation of escape. The drama plays with that temptation indirectly. Because Sam's secrecy isn't just about protecting others, it's also a cage for him. If he tells someone, he risks disbelief or danger. If he doesn't, he carries it alone. That no-win choice is its own kind of trap. And it's effective because it's emotionally plausible. People keep secrets all the time, not magic secrets, but painful ones, because the cost of speaking feels higher than the cost of silence. The show taps that truth. Let's also appreciate the premise's irony. A museum is full of objects people assume are inert, just displays. The drama flips that assumption and asks you to look at objects as containers of consequence. That's a great horror thriller move because it turns the safest-looking environment into a threat. You're not in a haunted forest. You're in a public institution with gift shops and school tours. That contrast makes the danger feel like it's hiding in plain sight. And I'm going to circle back to the statue repair specifically because that choice is so character-defining. Repair is intimate. Repair is patient. Repair requires touch. So for Sam to gain power through that act suggests that the show's idea of heroism is tactile and unglamorous. Not conquering, but maintaining. Not destroying, but restoring. If the drama continues to honor that philosophy in its later conflicts, it could end up being more emotionally resonant than the average secret-powered series. But if it abandons that and becomes pure combat, it'll lose its unique identity. That's the tightrope. And I'm watching it like a hawk because the premise deserves follow-through. Another thing worth noting, the city stakes are intriguing precisely because they're distant. We don't live in the city streets in the premise. We live in the museum. So when the show says only Sam can protect the city, it creates a looming pressure beyond the walls. It makes you feel like the museum is the front line, but not the whole war. That's a classic way to build scale without leaving your primary set piece. Now, do I wish we had more daylight scenes? Sometimes, yes. Not because I dislike the night vibe, but because daylight would make the museum feel different, safer on the surface, maybe more crowded, more performative. And that contrast could sharpen the night horror. When a show stays in one emotional register too long, even a strong register can lose impact. The drama hints at a broader world, and I wanted a bit more of it to make Sam's isolation sting harder. Still, when the show is in its element, Sam alone, ancient secrets humming under glass, it's legitimately gripping. And it doesn't need to show you everything. In fact, it's better when it doesn't. It trusts your imagination, and your imagination will always be meaner than the screen. Let me underline one more performance element. Fear is hard to act without becoming repetitive. Sam's fear evolves. Early fear is confusion. What is happening? Later fear becomes anticipation. I know what can happen. That shift matters, and the actor's body language changes accordingly. Confusion makes you freeze. Anticipation makes you move carefully. The show uses that evolution to keep tension fresh even when the setting stays consistent. Another rehook, because we are about to get into the moral side of the story. If Sam is the only one who can protect the city, who protects Sam? And does the drama even care? That question sits under everything. A lot of hero stories forget the hero support system because plot is hungry. This drama, by design, strips support away. Sam's anonymous. He's working nights. He's carrying a secret. That's narrative loneliness. And the more the threats intensify, the more you feel the absence of community. It's not just sad, it's scary. Because power without support becomes desperation. The themes of identity and anonymity also tie into the museum's public face. Museums are about curated identity, what a culture chooses to display. Sam's heroism is the opposite. Uncurated, unseen, unofficial. There's something quietly radical about making the night guard the protector, while the institution itself, this grand symbol of history, feels compromised by its own secrets. And okay, one more self-aware aside, because I can't help it. I love how dramas like this make a big salary sound like a trap. Because honestly, in fiction, the moment someone says the pay is great, you should hear boss music. In real life too, sometimes. If I had to describe the show's overall flavor so far, it's like candlelight in a lock hallway. Beautiful, but you're aware the flame could go out. The drama doesn't always give you clean answers. It gives you sensations. It gives you dread. It gives you the image of one person standing between a sleeping city and a waking past. And I'm not done digging into what works and what doesn't, because the more you think about this premise, the more you realize how many different shows it could have been. It could have been pure horror. It could have been a glossy superhero origin. It could have been an action-forward artifact battle series. Instead, it's trying to be a moody, socially aware supernatural thriller that treats heroism like labor. The next thing I want to unpack is how the show handles escalation without breaking its own grounded tone. Because once you've given Sam a mysterious power, the temptation is to keep upping the spectacle until the museum stops feeling like a real place and starts feeling like a video game arena. And there are moments where you can feel that temptation brushing against the edges of the storytelling, especially when the threats start to feel more frequent and the city stakes start pressing harder. And Sam's routine begins to fracture under the weight of what he's carrying, and the drama has to decide whether it's going to stay intimate with his fear or pull back to something bigger and louder, because that choice is going to determine whether the museum remains a character or just a backdrop. And the way the show frames Sam's movement through the building, his pauses, his listening, his hesitation, becomes even more important when the story starts asking him to be not just a guard, but a guardian in the truest sense, which is where the writing's discipline really gets tested. Because that choice is going to determine whether the museum remains a character or just a backdrop. And the way the show frames Sam's movement through the building, his pauses, his listening, his hesitation, becomes even more important when the story starts asking him to be not just a guard, but a guardian in the truest sense, which is where the writing's discipline really gets tested. And in a lot of supernatural dramas, that's exactly the moment they panic. They go, okay, people might get bored if we stay quiet. And suddenly every scene is a jump scare or a fist fight or a glowing effect shot. What I appreciated here is that Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia mostly resists that impulse. It understands that scale doesn't have to mean noise. The city can be in danger, and the show can still be intimate, because the real scale is what's happening inside Sam. The widening stakes work best when they're filtered through his exhaustion and his paranoia, not through louder explosions. There's a specific kind of tension that comes from someone having power, but not having control. The storyline tells us Sam obtains a mysterious power, but it doesn't say he masters it. And the drama leans into that ambiguity. It keeps the power feeling like something that happened to him, not something he selected from a menu. That's why the action, when it shows up, tends to feel like scrambling rather than flexing. It's protective, reactive, messy, which, honestly, is a more interesting flavor of heroism than perfection. Here's where I'll be a little sharp, but fair. The show sometimes flirts with making Sam the only one who can protect the city in a way that feels like a convenience button for the plot. Like, okay, nobody else can help, so we can keep everything centered on him. That can be thrilling, but it can also be narratively lonely in a way that's not always intentional. There's a difference between isolated hero as a theme and isolated hero, because the writers don't want to build out other moving parts. But this is important. Because the premise is literally about secrecy and invisibility, the loneliness does often feel intentional. The show is almost daring you to sit with the unfairness of it. Sam does the night shift. He handles the danger. He carries the secret. And the museum keeps being a museum in the daytime like nothing happened. That's not just a plot device. That's a whole worldview. Let me rehook you right here with a question that kept looping in my brain while watching. What if the museum's hundreds of years secret isn't just hidden from the public? What if it's hidden from the institution itself? Like, what if the building is keeping its own truth? The show doesn't hand you an answer, but it frames the museum like an organism, like something with memory and possibly agenda. And that's why the setting never gets old for me, even when the story beats repeat. Because museums are already loaded with implied violence. Not in a sensational way, but in a historical way. Every artifact has a backstory. Every ancient object came from somewhere, belonged to someone, survived something. The drama takes that background history as quiet pressure, and makes it literal. Threats emerging from artifacts isn't just spooky, it's the physical manifestation of buried consequence. The camera supports that by often treating exhibits like faces. Not literally, not like some goofy haunted doll thing, but in the way it frames them, a slow drift, a hold on texture, a cut that makes you feel like the object is noticing Sam. And the show is smart about not overdoing it. The moment you make an artifact wink at the viewer, you've turned dread into novelty. Here, the dread stays more psychological. Sam's awareness that the boundaries between display and danger are thin. Now, I want to talk about the story's pacing in the middle stretch, because that's where a lot of shows like this either depend or dilute. Without inventing specific episode events, I can still describe the rhythm the show settles into. Sam is caught between routine and rupture. He can't stop working nights because the job is still the job. He also can't pretend it's just the job because the power and the threats have invaded it. That creates an ongoing push-pull, normal behavior performed under abnormal stakes. Sometimes that push-pull is hypnotic. You watch Sam walk the same corridors and you feel the tension build because now you know what could happen there. The repetition becomes suspense. Other times, the push-pull turns into wheel spinning. You feel the show circling the same emotional note, Sam alone, Sam burdened, Sam cautious, without enough new pressure to change the situation. And what determines which experience you're having as a viewer is often the micro choices. How much the show reveals about the secret, how it varies the nature of the threats, how it complicates Sam's internal life beyond fear. If you're like me, you start think humans deserve to be seen. So watching Sam become the unseen barrier between the city and ancient danger, it hit me. It made me feel protective of him in a way that surprised me. Also, side note, it made me irrationally angry at every hypothetical museum visitor in the universe who would probably complain about bad service while this man is out here preventing historical doom. Again, not a real scene, but you get the vibe. My brain was inventing petty injustice just to feel something. Now, let's get into the craft of suspense, because this drama has a particular method. It uses space. It uses architecture. A museum at night is essentially a maze where the walls are glass, and the objects behind the glass are heavy with implied significance. The show blocks Sam's movement in a way that makes you feel distance. A corridor isn't just a corridor, it's time. It's how long it takes Sam to get from one safe zone to another. And when danger is implied, that distance becomes a threat. There's also a great use of foreground intimidation. They'll put something close to the camera, an exhibit edge, a sculpture silhouette, a reflection, so your eye is distracted. And Sam is smaller in the background, moving cautiously. It makes you feel like the museum is swallowing him. Even if you don't consciously notice the composition, your body feels it. The editing rhythm complements that. It doesn't always cut on action. Sometimes it cuts on hesitation. Sam pauses, the cut happens, and suddenly you're closer, like the show is pulling you into his anxiety. And when it wants to shock you, it doesn't necessarily do it with a loud sting. It might do it by removing sound entirely for half a second, letting your brain fill in the worst possibility. I want to praise the show for one thing that's easy to get wrong: keeping the threats scary without defining them too neatly. Deadly threats is intentionally broad. The temptation would be to turn them into a consistent monster type. But the idea that danger emerges from behind artifacts suggests variety. Different histories, different consequences, different shapes of threat. The show's tone supports that variety by not locking into one monster aesthetic. It keeps the danger more conceptual. The museum is a pressure cooker of old things, and something inside is pushing out. Of course, the downside of that is that sometimes the threat can feel vague. Vague threat equals vague stakes. If I don't understand what's at risk in a specific moment, I feel tension, but not urgency. The show is often better at mood than at clarity. And that's the trade. I'm not saying it has to explain everything. I'm saying it has to make me feel, in the moment, what Sam stands to lose if he fails. Here's a rehook that gets at my biggest fascination with this drama. Why does Sam keep going? Not the plot reason. The human reason. What is he telling himself at 4 a.m. when he's exhausted and scared and still chooses to take another step into the dark? The storyline gives us the foundation. He took the job for money, he gained power by accident, and now only he can protect the city. That's enough to justify his continued involvement. But emotionally, the best stories go deeper. They give you the private mantra. Even if it's never spoken, you feel it. And I think the show is trying to suggest that Sam's reason becomes something like ownership. Not of the museum, but of the responsibility. He didn't ask for this, but now that he has it, the idea of walking away might feel like cowardice, or betrayal, or like letting the city get hurt when he could have done something. That's a very human trap. Once you've saved someone once, you feel obligated to save them again, even if it destroys you. That obligation can be heroic. It can also be self-harm. This is where I'll offer another slightly contrarian take. I actually like that the show doesn't rush to give Sam a support system. Most dramas would introduce a trusted ally immediately. Someone who discovers the secret, becomes the confidant, provides exposition. That's convenient, but it also softens the loneliness. This drama's core identity is the solitude of the night shift. If it gave Sam a buddy too quickly, it would lose the most unique part of its emotional flavor. So even if it's frustrating, it's consistent. Still, I hope the show eventually complicates that solitude with more meaningful human friction. Not necessarily friendship, but consequences. Someone suspecting him. Someone using him. Someone benefiting from his invisibility. The story's premise about hidden heroism is ripe for moral exploitation. And I want the drama to go there, because that would deepen the themes of class and recognition beyond atmosphere. Let's talk about Sam as a physical presence again, because his job is physical. He walks. He stands. He listens. He touches. The power, whatever it specifically is, doesn't erase the bodily reality of being a night guard. He still gets tired. He still has to patrol. That grounding is important because it keeps the supernatural from drifting into pure abstraction. And the actor's performance is built around that bodily strain. You can feel the fatigue in the way Sam carries himself. Not melodramatic fatigue, no big speeches about being tired, but the quiet kind where your posture collapses a millimeter, your gaze dulls, your movements become economical. That kind of acting is hard because it's subtle, and it has to be sustained across long stretches of quiet. The show leans on it, and it mostly works. There's also something interesting in how Sam's face is lit. In many shots, he's half-lit, half-shadowed. That's an obvious visual metaphor to lives, to identities. But it's also just practical museum lighting. The show uses that realism to support the symbolism without making it feel like a high school film project. It's integrated. Now I want to return to that statue repair moment for a second, not to repeat it, but to pull out what it implies about the show's moral universe. Sam gains power by fixing something ancient. That suggests the power is tied to restoration, to stewardship. So when threats start emerging from artifacts, it frames Sam less as an aggressor and more as a custodian. He's not out hunting danger, he's maintaining balance. That's why the museum setting is perfect. Museums are about preservation, which is inherently conservative in the literal sense, keeping things as they are. But history doesn't always want to stay preserved. Sometimes it wants justice. Sometimes it wants revenge. Sometimes it wants to be acknowledged. And that's where the show could get really deep if it chooses. What if some of the threats are not purely evil, but purely unresolved? I'm not claiming the show explicitly does that, because the storyline doesn't say. I'm saying the premise is fertile for it, and the mood suggests it might be thinking along those lines. Rehook again. What if protecting the city doesn't mean destroying what emerges, but understanding why it's emerging? If the show commits to that, it could be more than just survival horror. Now, because I'm not spoiling endgame reveals, and because we don't have them, I can't tell you whether the show follows through on that philosophical possibility. What I can tell you is that the best scenes are the ones where Sam's fear is layered with curiosity. When he's not just running, but noticing. When he's not just reacting, but connecting dots. Those moments make him feel like a real protagonist rather than a camera carrier. The show also uses the nobody knows the hero angle to create a particular kind of tension that's different from most masked hero stories. In most superhero narratives, secrecy is a strategic choice. Here, it's more like an inevitability. Sam is a night guard. He's alone. Things happen at night. The city wakes up and nothing appears to have changed. So his heroism is structurally hidden. It's built into the premise. That's a stronger, more tragic form of anonymity, because it's not something he can simply decide to end without causing chaos. And the drama invites you to feel the weird injustice of that. You watch him take on danger and then return to quiet corridors. It's like watching someone fight a fire and then mop the floor afterwards because that's still their job. Let me give you another vivid composite mini-scene, because the show's tension often works in these small, cinematic beats. Picture Sam doing a routine check. The museum is quiet in that way that makes your ears ring. His flashlight beam sweeps across glass, catching dust motes like tiny floating stars. He stops at a display. Not because it moves, but because something about it feels wrong. The camera holds on his hand hovering, not touching. You hear the faintest creak, like wood settling, but it's too timed, too intentional. Sam's breathing changes. He shifts his weight, preparing to either step forward or step back. And the show doesn't cut away to show you the monster. It stays with his face. That's the bold choice. The fear is in him, not in the thing. When something finally happens, maybe a sudden disturbance, maybe a sharp sound, maybe a shadow shift, you feel it as an attack on his concentration, on his attempt to be professional in an impossible situation. That kind of scene is why I kept watching even when I wanted more narrative clarity. The craft is confident. Now, I want to be honest about something that might annoy certain viewers. I think the show's big salary hook is almost too clean. Like, sure, money motivates people, absolutely. But the way it's presented can feel like a genre signpost. High pay, creepy job is a classic setup. The show elevates it with mood and theme, but it's still a familiar door into the story. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I think the drama's best value isn't originality of premise, it's the way it uses the premise to talk about invisible labor and the weight of history. If you go in expecting a wildly unique story blueprint, you might not be impressed. If you go in wanting a familiar blueprint executed with a strong atmosphere and a surprisingly melancholy moral spine, you'll be happier. Rehook. The biggest risk for a show like this is that it becomes nothing but vibes. So does it actually build a story, or does it just build a mood? My answer is, it builds both, but it leans on mood to carry the slow patches. Let's talk about that slow patch feeling, because it's real. Midrun, you can sense the show pausing to keep the mystery alive. It doesn't want to give away the secret hidden for hundreds of years too quickly. It wants you to earn it. That's fair. But mysteries have to be fed. You need breadcrumbs, not just fog. When the show provides those breadcrumbs, tiny revelations about the nature of the museum's secret, tiny shifts in Sam's understanding, you feel the story tightening. When it doesn't, you feel like you're walking the corridors with Sam without moving closer to anything. The corridor metaphor becomes literal. That's when people start calling it repetitive. Yet, in defense of the show, repetition is also part of the thematic point. Night work is repetitive. Guard work is repetitive. Trauma is repetitive. If Sam's life becomes a loop of danger and silence, the structure mirroring that loop is not an accident. The question is whether the show can keep that loop emotionally evolving rather than static. And it does evolve, mainly through Sam's changing relationship to his own fear. Early on, fear is shock. Later, fear becomes expectation. Eventually, fear can become numbness. And numbness is terrifying, because it means you stop respecting danger. The show hints at that trajectory in how Sam moves through the space. The more familiar he becomes with the museum's night phase, the less he flinches at small disturbances. That's character growth in a horror key. Sound design also supports that growth. Early, the show might emphasize every creak. Later, it lets creaks blend into the background, like Sam's brain has categorized them as normal. Then it hits you with a sound that's wrong in a different way. That's a neat psychological trick. You acclimate alongside the character, and then the show pulls the rug out. Another thing I want to praise is how the museum's age is felt. Old museum can mean a lot of things. Here, the atmosphere suggests layered age, not just antique aesthetic. The building feels like it has been modified over time. Corridors feel like they've been repurposed. The show implies history not just through artifacts, but through the space itself. That's a production design win, and it makes the premise believable. Of course, a place like this could hide something for hundreds of years. Of course, it could swallow secrets. And in terms of color palette, the show tends to live in muted tones, cold blues, dusty ambers, sickly greens depending on the lighting source. It's not just dark. It's specific kinds of dark. Flashlight white versus exhibit spotlight yellow creates different moods. The show uses that contrast to signal safety versus danger without having to spell it out. Rehook again. If Sam is the only one who can protect the city, what does that do to his sense of self-worth? Does he start to feel like a tool? A weapon? A caretaker? A prisoner? The show plays with those possibilities without always naming them. This is where the secret hero concept becomes psychologically rich. Because when you do something dangerous and nobody knows, you can start to wonder if it even happened. If it mattered. If you matter. That's not a supernatural problem. That's a human one. The show's best scenes, for me, are the ones that make you feel the existential loneliness of doing the right thing in silence. And it's also where the drama's class commentary hits hardest. Sam takes the job for money. That implies need. When the show frames him as the only protector, it's asking you to look at who society depends on in emergencies. Often, it's people who are underpaid, overlooked, expected to absorb risk without recognition. Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia turns that reality into myth. That's a powerful move. It's also a little bitter. Now, I'll admit something. I'm usually someone who wants lore. I want the rules of the power. I want the why. And there were moments where I had to consciously relax and go, okay, let the show be a vibe. Let it be a mystery. Because it's not trying to be a lore-heavy fantasy epic. It's trying to be a dread-driven thriller with a heroic spine. So if you're a newcomer and you're deciding whether to watch, adjust expectations. Don't go in thinking you'll get a neat how-to manual for the power in the early stretch. Go in ready to feel unsettled. Go in ready for a show that wants you to sit in the quiet. And I'm not saying it's perfect at that. Sometimes it uses the quiet as a shield against making narrative choices. But overall, the quiet is purposeful. Rehook. You know what's scarier than a monster in a museum? A museum that makes you question whether it's a prison, a vault, or a mouth. Because that's the vibe. The museum isn't passive. It's holding something. It's hiding something. It's shaping Sam. The show uses architecture like psychology. Locked doors become barriers inside Sam's life. Glass cases become the separation between what is known and what is contained. Security routines become rituals. And once you start viewing the show that way, the pacing makes more sense. It's not just moving plot pieces. It's building a relationship between man and building. And that relationship has a power imbalance. Sam might have gained a mysterious power, but the museum has hundreds of years of secrets. That's not a fair fight. The drama keeps that imbalance present by making Sam look small in frame, by emphasizing long distances, by shooting him from above or through layers of glass. Even when he's the protagonist, the world dwarfs him. There's also an interesting moral question the show raises implicitly. Is Sam protecting the city from the artifacts, or protecting the artifacts from the city? Museums exist to display and preserve, but if artifacts are dangerous, maybe they shouldn't be displayed. If the museum's secret is hidden for a reason, perhaps exposure is the threat. Sam is caught between those contradictory missions. Guard the museum, guard the people. That's a classic ethical dilemma disguised as supernatural thriller. Now, the show doesn't explicitly say that's the dilemma. I'm reading it from the premise and the way the tone behaves. But the feeling is there, that Sam's job and his heroism might not be aligned. He might be forced to choose between institutional loyalty and public safety at some point. And if the show goes there, it could get really compelling. Rehook. If the museum is a symbol of what society values, what does it mean that its protector is invisible? That question keeps echoing. Let me talk about tension building again, but specifically how the show handles time. Night shift stories have an inherent countdown. Morning comes. People arrive. The building changes. The danger either has to be contained before daylight or it spills into the day. Even if the show doesn't literally do a ticking clock every episode, that structure is implied. And it's used well. Scenes feel like they're happening in stolen time. Hours where the world is asleep and the rules are different. That's why the city stakes work better in theory than in direct depiction. The city is asleep, Sam is awake. He becomes the city's immune system in the dark. That's an evocative concept. I also want to mention how the show treats heroism as something almost clerical. Sam's actions are repetitive, procedural, often solitary. He's not giving speeches. He's checking doors. He's keeping things contained. That's a very grounded form of heroism. And I love it. It's not sexy, but it's real. Now, where I think the show risks losing some viewers is when it leans too heavily into Sam is the only one. Because if the protagonist is the only active agent, the world can start to feel passive. Threats appear, Sam responds, threats retreat, repeat. The drama needs other pressures, social, institutional, psychological, to keep the narrative dynamic. The good news is, the premise already contains those pressures. Sam's financial motivation is pressure. His secrecy is pressure. His invisibility is pressure. The museum's age is pressure. The city stakes are pressure. The show just has to keep rotating those pressures so it doesn't feel like the same scene in a new hallway. Rehook again. What if the most dangerous artifact in the museum isn't the one that attacks, but the one that tempts? That's a story angle the premise suggests, and I'm curious whether the show flirts with it. Because power stories are always about temptation, even when they pretend not to be. Sam gains a mysterious power. The obvious conflict is external. Threats emerge, he must fight. The deeper conflict is internal. What does having the power do to his choices? Does he start to rely on it? Does he start to feel above normal rules? Does he start to justify secrecy as control? The premise doesn't confirm those beats, so I won't claim them. But the show's tone seems aware that power changes people, not just their abilities. And it would be a wasted opportunity if it didn't explore that. Because the most interesting version of this story isn't Sam becomes strong. It's Sam becomes different. There's also a subtle identity theme in the act of repairing the statue. Repair implies respect for the past. But what if the past doesn't deserve respect? What if some artifacts represent oppression? Violence? Theft? Museums can be controversial. The show doesn't explicitly take that political angle in the premise, but the thematic door is there. The idea that preserving history can also preserve harm. If threats emerge from artifacts, maybe that's the harm demanding attention. Now, I'm not asking this drama to become a lecture. It shouldn't. The moment it becomes preachy, it dies. But even a whisper of that complexity would elevate it from a cool premise to a meaningful one. Rehook. Do you feel the show is trying to scare you? Or trying to make you feel complicit, like you, too, have been walking past glass cases without thinking about what's trapped inside? Because that's the vibe I kept getting. It's not just boo. It's look. It's pay attention. Its objects have stories. Sam's job is to watch. The audience's job becomes watching him watch. That layered observation creates a weird intimacy. You start noticing your own attention patterns. You start anticipating what the show wants you to fear. And the show sometimes uses that against you. For instance, it'll hold on an artifact just long enough for you to expect it to do something, then cut away and let nothing happen. That's not filler. That's training. It's teaching you the building is unpredictable. And unpredictability is the heart of dread. Now, I also want to acknowledge that unpredictability can become frustrating if overused. You need payoff. If every threat is implied and rarely shown, you eventually stop investing. The show has to balance implication with manifestation. It can't live entirely in suggestion. Based on the premise, there are deadly threats, which implies the show does deliver danger, not just hints. And when it delivers, it tends to deliver in a way that feels abrupt, like a breach rather than a performance. Let's talk about the city again. Only Sam can protect the city is a big statement. It's heroic, but it's also isolating. It implies the city is unaware, asleep, complacent. That creates a strange dynamic. Sam is saving people who will never thank him. And yes, heroism shouldn't require thanks. But the human mind does require acknowledgement to stay sane. The drama uses that dynamic to build a quiet tragedy. Sam's life becomes divided. The public world, where he's a night guard, and the hidden world, where he's a protector. And because those worlds share the same physical space, the museum, the division is always present. He can't step out of the secret world without stepping out of his job. That's tight, claustrophobic storytelling. Rehook. What happens if Sam's power makes him the museum's property? Like, not legally, obviously, emotionally, metaphysically. The show flirts with that sense of ownership that you touched the statue, now you belong to this. That's one of the creepiest aspects of the premise. Sam doesn't choose the power. He triggers it by accident. That accident reads like a binding contract. It's folklore logic. You interact with the ancient object, you're marked. The show uses modern realism, security work, wages, routine to frame an old myth, the curse of contact. And that mythic undercurrent is why the show's tone works. It's not just modern thriller. It feels like a story that could be told around a fire, updated for fluorescent-lit hallways and security cameras. Speaking of security cameras, the show uses surveillance as both a practical tool and a thematic mirror. A security guard is literally tasked with watching. The museum likely has cameras, monitors, angels. Even if the show doesn't focus on them constantly, the concept of surveillance hangs over everything. Sam watches the museum. The museum, in a sense, watches Sam. The audience watches them both. That makes the secret hero theme even sharper. In a world of cameras, he still remains unseen. That's either because what he's doing can't be captured, or because society doesn't know what to look for. And that's one of the show's strongest subtexts. People can look directly at the truth and still not see it if they don't have the framework. Rehook. Is Sam's anonymity protection or erasure? The show keeps threading that needle, and it's painful in the best way. Now, I'm going to be honest about one more thing that may divide viewers. The drama's emotional tone is heavy. Even when it's thrilling, it's not light. It's not fun spooky. It's more like existential spooky. That means the show asks you to invest in feelings that don't resolve quickly. If you want neat catharsis every episode, you might not get it. If you enjoy slow pressure, you'll appreciate it. This is where my mixed but loved aspects stance settles. I love the mood, the setting, the performance restraint, the way the premise becomes an emotional metaphor. I'm mixed on pacing in the middle and on the degree of narrative clarity. I wanted the show to trust the audience enough to keep things mysterious, but also respect the audience enough to give us directional progress. And I think it does, just not always at the pace I personally prefer. Rehook. When the threats start emerging, does the show treat them as random horror or as messages? The difference matters. Because if threats are random, the story is survival. If threats are messages, the story is dialogue with the past. The museum setting screams message. The secret hidden for hundreds of years screams message. Sam's power obtained through repair screams message. The show's most interesting potential is in that second option, that the past is communicating through danger, forcing the present to respond. Now, I can't claim the show explicitly answers that, but I can say the atmosphere feels intentional enough that it seems aware of the implication. Let's talk about how Sam is written as a protagonist. He's not a genius detective. He's not a soldier. He's a worker. That's a big choice. It changes the genre flavor. Instead of feeling like the hero enters the dungeon, it feels like the dungeon enters the worker's life. That reversal creates empathy. Sam is not equipped, and because he's not equipped, every small choice feels significant. It also allows the show to explore competence in a grounded way. Sam may not know ancient secrets, but he knows how to do his job. He knows routines, keys, doors, protocols. That competence becomes his baseline hero tool alongside the power. And that's a cool blend. Magic plus mundane procedure. Rehook. The best horror is when the protagonist's normal skills become survival skills. Does the show use Sam's guard instincts creatively? When it does, it sings. There's something satisfying about seeing a character's ordinary expertise matter. Sam's ability to notice small changes, to remember what's usually where, to sense when something is off, that's security work, and it's also suspense storytelling. The show's tension often comes from Sam noticing a detail. Noticing is the first act of heroism here. Now, I want to acknowledge something about the show's title and marketing vibe. Secret Strength can sound cheesy. It can sound like a webtoon adaptation with overpowered abilities and flashy fights. This show, at least in the way the premise is written and the way the atmosphere behaves, feels more grounded than that. It's not trying to be cute. It's trying to be unsettling. And that's why I think some viewers might misjudge it if they go in expecting popcorn action. It's more like a candlelit thriller with occasional spikes of danger. Rehook. Do you ever feel like the museum is testing Sam? Not attacking him, but measuring him? That's the creepiest interpretation, and the show invites it. Because the power comes from repairing a statue, an act of care. That suggests a kind of selection process based on character, not compatibility. Sam becomes the protector because he fixed something rather than exploited it. That's a moral selection. So the museum testing him would align with that. The idea that the building chooses its guardian is mythic and creepy. Now, again, I'm not claiming the show explicitly confirms that. But it's a vibe the drama cultivates. Sam doesn't feel like he found the secret. It feels like the secret found him. Let's talk about tension between private life and secret life, even if the premise doesn't mention Sam's family, friends, romance, any of that. It still implies a life outside work. People don't take jobs in a vacuum. Money motivation implies responsibilities, and secrecy implies distance. The show's premise already contains relationship strain, even if it doesn't name the relationships. The drama uses that implied strain to keep Sam emotionally cornered. He can't talk about what's happening. He can't easily leave. He can't easily ask for help. That's a recipe for isolation. And isolation is a horror element on its own. Rehook. The biggest threat might not be what emerges from artifacts. It might be what Sam becomes while dealing with it. That's where the story gets its bite. Because prolonged secrecy changes you. It makes you suspicious. It makes you tired. It can make you resentful. If Sam is doing all this saving and nobody knows, he might start to feel separate from the world he's protecting. And separation can become superiority, or bitterness, or numbness. That psychological trajectory is where the show's performance and writing have the chance to do something special. Now, I want to say something kind about the show's restraint again, because I think it's and Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia takes that risk. It trusts the audience to sit with atmosphere. That's a creative gamble, and it's one I respect. But I'm not going to pretend it always lands. Sometimes quiet feels like depth. Sometimes quiet feels like padding. The difference is whether the quiet changes something inside the character. If Sam emerges from a quiet scene slightly altered, more aware, more frightened, more resolved, then the scene matters. If he emerges the same, it's just air. Rehook. You can tell a show's quality by how it handles nothing happening. Does it still feel tense when nothing happens? This one often does, which is why it stuck with me. Because even when nothing happens, the museum feels alive. The framing, the soundscape, the slow drift of the camera. It keeps your body on edge. And that's not accidental. That's craft. Let's touch on the editing of movement. The show often uses long takes for Sam walking. That could be boring. Here it becomes suspense because the set is charged. Every doorway is a question. Every reflection is a possibility. And the show understands that movement is story. Sam walking is Sam choosing to continue. Sam stopping is Sam sensing danger. Sam turning is Sam confronting fear. It's simple, but it's effective. Now, if you're a newcomer and you're worried this is all metaphor and no fun, don't worry. There's a thrill element. The threats are described as deadly, and the show's tone supports the idea that Sam is in real danger, not just psychological discomfort. The suspense is not abstract. It's survival coded. The question is whether you need explicit action choreography or whether implied danger and bursts of confrontation are enough for you. Rehook. What does protecting the city even look like when you're one person in a museum at night? The show's answer is, it looks like containment, like secrecy, like sacrifice. And that answer is what makes the show feel quietly tragic. Sam's heroism is not celebrated. It's not even witnessed. It's labor performed in silence. There's a moral beauty in that, but also a sadness. I'm going to talk about the show's emotional color. It's not romantic. It's not comedic. It's not melodramatic. It's more like weary, like a story told by someone who's been awake too long. That tone fits the night shift premise. It also gives the show a distinctive identity. You can feel the hours in it. Now, because I'm being moderate on spoilers and we don't have specific plot points, I can't tell you exactly how the show escalates toward its later stretches. What I can tell you is what a good version of this story should do, and what this one seems poised to attempt. The secret hidden for hundreds of years should start to feel less like a twist and more like a system. Something embedded in the museum's function. Something that has been maintained. Something that requires a guardian. If the show reveals the secret in a way that recontextualizes the museum itself, its purpose, its public face, its relationship to the city, that's when everything clicks. That's when the mood becomes narrative. And based on how carefully the show builds atmosphere, I suspect it understands that payoff matters. Rehook. If the secret is centuries old, somebody kept it. Somebody maintained it. Does the show make you feel the weight of that maintenance? Because Sam is now part of that chain. That's a really interesting thematic idea. Guardianship as inheritance. Sam didn't ask for it, but he's now inside a lineage of secrecy. That's both epic and claustrophobic. Epic because it connects him to centuries. Claustrophobic because it traps him in obligation. And that's why the accidental repair, inciting incident is so perfect. It's not a heroic initiation ritual. It's a mistake, or a coincidence, or fate, depending on how you read it. And the ambiguity makes it feel unfair. Sam didn't volunteer. He got drafted. Now, let me be a little playful for a second, because the show's seriousness can be intense. There's a part of me that kept thinking, so you're telling me the museum's secret has been hidden for hundreds of years, and the night it finally wakes up is Sam's first shift? That's classic fiction timing. Convenient as hell. But the show sells it emotionally, so I forgive it. Mostly. I still side-eye the universe a little. Rehook. The show is asking you to accept one big coincidence. Sam's first night. After that, it has to earn everything else through character. Does it? Often yes. And it earns it by making Sam feel like a real person stuck in an unreal situation. His fear is not glamorous. His courage is not clean. His power is not a party trick. The show's identity is built on that groundedness. Now, because you asked for the final part, I'm continuing into the deeper evaluation phase. How the show holds up as a whole, where it succeeds, where it falters, and why I still found myself thinking about it after the screen went dark. But I'm going to keep avoiding any invented endgame specifics. If the show has a major final reveal, I'm not going to fabricate it. I'll talk about the feeling of the late game stretch instead. Whether it pace of tension, whether it maintains tone, whether it respects Sam's arc. Rehook. Tone consistency is the hardest thing in a drama like this. Does it stay airy when it gets bigger? That's the test. A lot of shows lose their magic when they scale up. The intimate dread gets replaced by generic action. The museum isn't where the story happens. It is the story. When the drama keeps its focus there, keeping the threats tied to artifacts, keeping the tension tied to space, it holds onto its identity even as stakes expand. When it drifts toward broader, city danger, abstraction, without enough concrete grounding, the story can feel slightly unmoored. The city is a concept. The museum is a texture. The show needs texture. Performance-wise, the actor playing Sam carries the late-game pressure by looking increasingly worn, increasingly alert, increasingly alone. It's a subtle arc. He doesn't become a different person overnight. He becomes the same person under heavier weight. That's believable. It's also painful to watch in a good way. Rehook. The show's emotional center isn't the secret. It's Sam's burden. If you connect to that, the show works. If you don't, it might feel slow. And that's the honest truth. This is not a show you watch purely for puzzle solving. It's a show you watch to inhabit a mood and a character. Let's talk about cinematography choices that support that burden. The show often frames Sam through barriers. Door frames, glass, railings, shadows. It's visual language for being boxed in. It also uses long empty shots after Sam exits a space, like the museum is still there, still watching, still holding. That creates a sense that Sam's presence is temporary, but the building's presence is permanent. That's dread. And the music motifs, again, generally speaking, tend to be minimalistic. You'll get repeating low tones, subtle pulses, sometimes a faint melodic line that feels like an ancient lullaby twisted into warning. The score doesn't tell you, this is epic. It tells you, this is wrong. That's exactly what the show needs. Rehook. What I wanted most, as a viewer, wasn't more action. It was one clear emotional turning point where Sam decides what kind of protector he is. Does the show give you that feeling? It gestures at it. Because Sam's can't just be guy gets power. Guy uses power. It has to be guy chooses. Even if the choice is quiet, even if it's just him standing in a hallway and deciding to step forward, that's still a choice. And I think the show structure is built around repeating that choice. Every night, Sam has to decide again. That repetition is both the heroism and the tragedy. It's not one big sacrifice. It's many small ones. Now, I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to stop this message at a natural breath before we move into the so what does Flick Flair actually think overall territory, because I'm not wrapping anything up yet, and I'm definitely not delivering a final verdict until we've fully earned the space to do it properly. Right now, I want to dig even deeper into the show's biggest strength, how it makes objects feel dangerous without cheapening history, and its biggest weakness, how it sometimes confuses mystery with momentum. Because the difference between those two is exactly where Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia either becomes a cult favorite or becomes a show people describe as cool vibe, but because the difference between those two is exactly where Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia either becomes a cult favorite or becomes a show people describe as cool vibe, but the reason the objects feel dangerous in this drama isn't just that they're old or cursed in a generic way. It's that the show treats objects like containers. Not containers in a fantasy rulebook sense, but in a human sense. Like how you can walk into a room and feel the weight of what happened there, even if nobody tells you. The artifacts are framed like they're holding pressure. You get close-ups that linger on texture. Cracks, worn edges, surfaces polished by hands that have been gone for centuries. And the show is basically saying, you think this is neutral? You think this is dead? It's quietly accusing the audience of complacency. And the museum setting is such a smart amplifier for that accusation. Because museums in real life are places where we go to consume history safely. You pay the ticket. You look. You read a plaque. You exit through the gift shop. This drama takes that safe consumption and flips it into exposure. At night, when nobody's there to interpret the artifacts for you with signage and guided tours, the objects get their own voice. It's not that the show hates museums. It's that it's suspicious of what museums promise: containment. Here's the rehook that made me sit up mid-watch. If the museum is designed to contain the past, what happens when containment fails? And what does it say that the institution's official systems aren't what saves the city? Sam is? That's where the class subtext stops being a neat angle and starts being the spine of the story. Sam is labor. Sam is the invisible system. And when the official system fails, the invisible system is what holds. That's a very modern horror, honestly. Not ghosts, structural dependence that nobody wants to admit. This is also why I keep defending some of the slower scenes. There's a version of this story where it's just artifact threat of the week, Sam throws his power around, city saved, next. That would be watchable. It would also be disposable. The moments that linger are the ones where you can feel Sam's resentment trying to form, but not quite becoming a thought, because he's too busy surviving. The show lets the emotional consequences accumulate like dust. You don't notice it at first, and then suddenly everything looks heavier. Now, let's be clear. Mystery is not momentum. Mystery is a tool. Momentum is movement. And sometimes this drama uses mystery as if it's movement. It's like it assumes that withholding information automatically equals tension. It doesn't. Withholding can create tension if what you do reveal creates forward pressure. New questions that are sharper than the old ones, new stakes that are more personal, new conflicts that force choices. If the show is simply refusing to clarify anything, that can feel like stalling. A lot of the time, Satpam Museum dengan Kekuatan Rahasia avoids that trap by keeping the emotional stakes moving even when the lore stays foggy. Sam's relationship to the museum changes. His comfort level changes. His paranoia changes. His sense of responsibility deepens. That's movement. That's momentum, even if the secret itself remains partially veiled. But I won't pretend it never tests your patience. There are stretches where you can feel the show circling its own premise, like it's afraid that if it advances too much, the magic will evaporate. And to be fair, that fear isn't irrational. Mystery shows often collapse when they over-explain. The trick is to reveal in a way that opens new doors rather than closing the box. Rehook. The show doesn't need to explain the entire centuries-old secret to feel satisfying. So what does it need to do to keep you hooked? For me, it needs to keep forcing Sam into new kinds of choices, not just new kinds of danger. Because danger can become routine. Choice doesn't. Choice is where character is born. The strongest kind of scene in this drama isn't necessarily Sam faces a deadly threat. It's Sam faces a dilemma. Even a small one. Do I touch the object or leave it alone? Do I investigate a sound or pretend I didn't hear it? Do I prioritize the museum's rules or the city's safety? Do I do what I'm paid to do or what I feel compelled to do? Those questions are drama. Those questions are the engine. And the show's direction often underscores those dilemmas with blocking. Sam will physically hover at thresholds. Doors become decisions. Staircases become decisions. Even the simple act of stepping into a gallery can feel like crossing into obligation. That's why the museum feels like more than a set. It's a decision machine. The architecture keeps presenting Sam with yes or no moments, and every yes drags him deeper. One of my favorite craft details is how the show uses reflections to suggest split identity without getting corny. You'll see Sam in glass cases, but it's never a clean reflection. It's layered, his face over the artifact, his silhouette merged with some ancient figure. And it's subtle enough that you don't feel the director elbowing you in the ribs. It's just there, like a visual whisper, you're becoming part of this. Rehook. It's easy to make a museum spooky. It's harder to make it emotionally meaningful. Does this drama manage that? More often than not, yes, because it ties the building to Sam's internal shift. And that internal shift is the real arc. I'm going to linger on this because it's where the acting impressed me the most. You can track Sam's transformation not by big statements, but by micro adjustments. The way he listens changes. Early on, he listens like a person waiting for confirmation he's imagining things. Later, he listens like a person cataloging threats. That's a huge psychological shift. The body doesn't lie. His posture becomes more economical, like he's conserving energy. His eyes stop darting randomly and start scanning intentionally. He becomes a predator in the most reluctant way. But the show never makes him cool about it. He's not enjoying it. He's not leveling up. He's adapting. And that's a much more unsettling, adult way to tell a power story. Now, about the power itself. Because the premise is careful not to define it, the show has to communicate power through consequence. If you can't show me the rule book, show me the weight. Show me that when Sam uses the power, something changes in him, in the space, in the stakes. The show does that by making the power feel like a disturbance in the museum's equilibrium. Even if you're not told exactly what the ability is, you can feel that something has been activated. The sound shifts. The lighting sometimes feels slightly wrong. The camera gets closer or more disoriented. You sense that reality has been nudged. That's good storytelling. It's also risky because some viewers will want the neat mechanics. If you're that viewer, you might feel hungry. But if you like your supernatural elements to feel like folklore, half seen, half understood, this approach is satisfying. Rehook. If Sam's power came from repairing a statue, what does using that power do? Does it repair or does it break? That tension is what keeps the ability interesting even without a clear explanation. Because the moral angle is right there. Repair is constructive. Combat is destructive. Protection can be either. If Sam has to protect the city, he may be forced into destruction. That creates internal conflict. And even if the show doesn't fully articulate it with dialogue, it's embedded in the premise. A caretaker forced into violence is always more compelling than a warrior doing warrior things. This drama also plays with the idea of uncredited heroism in a way that made me think of real night workers, security, cleaners, nurses, factory shifts. People who keep society running while everyone else sleeps. The show doesn't need to do a speech about it. It just needs to show Sam alone, doing rounds, and then show the city in daytime, oblivious. That contrast is the message. I'm going to make another personal confession here because it genuinely shaped how I watched. I grew up with that night shift aura in my family. People who worked odd hours, came home exhausted, never fully synchronized with the rest of the world. So when a show depicts a character living in that time zone, I'm already emotionally primed. There's something inherently melancholy about being awake when everyone else is asleep. The drama uses that melancholy as its emotional baseline. It doesn't feel like a gimmick to me. It feels honest. Rehook. The scariest part of the show might be that Sam's life becomes a permanent night, even when the sun comes up. That's what secret burdens do. And that's why the only Sam can protect the city line lands less like a triumph and destiny and more like a sentence. A punishment, or at least a life-limiting condition. The show is pretty consistent about not romanticizing that. Now, I want to go deeper into the museum as metaphor because it's doing heavy lifting. A museum is a place where we decide what gets remembered, what is worthy of preservation, what becomes a national story, a cultural story. The secret hidden for hundreds of years suggests that not everything is meant to be remembered publicly. Some things are deliberately buried. So when threats emerge from behind artifacts, the show is dramatizing the return of buried truths. The past doesn't stay behind glass just because we put it there. That's not an academic reading, it's a gut-level reading. The show makes you feel it viscerally. The glass isn't enough. The locks aren't enough. The labels aren't enough. And Sam, the guard, is standing between official narrative and messy reality. Rehook. If museums are about control, controlling stories, controlling access, then what happens when the museum loses control? That's where the drama's horror becomes political without ever saying the word political. Now, let me pivot into something that might sound like a criticism, but is actually praise. The show is willing to let you feel uncomfortable without immediately soothing you. A lot of mainstream dramas are addicted to emotional resolution. They want every scene to be processed. This drama sometimes ends scenes in the middle of a feeling. Sam is scared, scene cuts. Sam is confused, scene cuts. Sam is alone, scene cuts. That incompleteness mirrors how fear actually feels. You don't get closure, you just get tired. But again, that choice can read as slow if you're not in the mood. So your viewing experience will depend on whether you enjoy being left hanging. Now, if I had to pinpoint the moments where the show loses a bit of power, it's when it leans too hard on the abstract idea of the city as an endangered object. Cities are hard to care about as concepts. People are easier. Places are easier. The museum is easy. Sam is easy. The show's best city stakes moments are the ones that make the city feel like an extension of Sam's life, his need, his fear, his responsibility, rather than a generic population at risk. Rehook. Here's the contradiction I love. The show's stakes are huge, but its best scenes are small. That's not a flaw. That's an identity. Because those small scenes are where the craftsmanship is. The sound of a key turning in a lock can be suspense. The glow of a flashlight can be suspense. Sam pausing before touching an object can be suspense. That's not easy to pull off. That takes confidence. And it takes a director who understands that you can scare people with anticipation, not just with content. I also want to talk about how the show uses the museum's public face as a kind of mask. In the daytime, conceptually, the museum is a civic space. Educational, calm, curated. At night, it becomes a private space, almost sacred, almost forbidden. That duality is a mirror of Sam's duality. Day world versus night world, public role versus secret role. The show's theme and its setting are aligned. That alignment is why it feels coherent even when plot clarity wobbles. Rehook. If the museum has two faces and Sam has two faces, which one is real? That's the emotional question under all the supernatural noise. Now, let's go into the respectful contrarian take I hinted at earlier but didn't fully unpack. I think the show is actually better when it doesn't try to be cool. Whenever it leans into aestheticized hero shots, Sam looking dramatic, power implied, danger looming, it's fine, but it's not the show's strength. The show's strength is awkward realism. The moments where Sam looks tired, uncertain, even annoyed, are the moments where the drama becomes distinct. Coolness flattens him into a trope. Awkwardness makes him human. So if you're watching and you find yourself thinking, this is kind of slow, I'd encourage you to recalibrate to what the show is actually offering. Not speed, but texture. Not fireworks, but dread. Not hero fantasy, but worker horror. Rehook. The show's secret weapon isn't the secret. It's the feeling of walking alone in a place full of trapped history. If that feeling gets you, you're locked in. Now, because the user command here was next part and not next script, I'm just going to keep flowing. But if the platform cuts me off again, just tell me next script and I'll continue exactly from the cutoff with no repeats. Let's talk about dialogue and silence again, because it matters. This drama is not a chatterbox. It doesn't explain itself constantly. Sam isn't constantly narrating his feelings. That's good. It avoids melodrama. But it also means the show relies heavily on visual storytelling. And it succeeds because the museum is inherently cinematic. You don't need lines when you have long corridors, reflective glass, looming exhibits, and a protagonist whose job is to observe. The show also uses diegetic sound, sounds that exist in the world as emotional manipulation. Footsteps, keys, fabric rustling, the faint hum of lights. Those sounds become motifs. They're like the museum's heartbeat. When that heartbeat changes, you feel it. And sometimes, the show will bring in non-diegetic score so subtly you almost don't notice until it's gone. That's a great technique. Make the audience feel something without pointing at it, then remove it to create emptiness. Emptiness is fear. Rehook. You know what the show does brilliantly? It makes you lean in. When a drama can make you physically lean toward the screen, it's doing something right. Now, I want to explore the morality of Sam's secrecy. We're told nobody knows who the hero really is. That could be framed as noble sacrifice. It could also be framed as a lie. A necessary lie, maybe, but still a lie. The show's tone suggests it treats secrecy as burden, not as virtue. And that nuance matters, because secrecy has consequences. It isolates you. It makes you suspicious. It can make you control information. It can lead to paternalism, deciding what others can or can't know for their own good. If the show chooses to interrogate that, if it makes Sam grapple with whether he has the right to keep the city ignorant, it could get really sharp. If it doesn't, secrecy remains just a premise feature. Based on the mood and the thematic interest in invisibility, I suspect it leans toward interrogation, even if quietly. Rehook. What happens when being the secret protector starts to feel less like sacrifice and more like ownership? That's where hero stories turn dark. And this show is close enough to the abyss to make that interesting. Another angle. Sam is protecting the city from threats that emerge from artifacts. But artifacts are part of cultural heritage. If he destroys or damages them in the process, what does that mean? Is he protecting people at the cost of history? Or protecting history at the cost of people? The museum as a setting makes every action potentially symbolic. You're not fighting in an alleyway. You're fighting in a place that represents memory. That raises the ethical temperature automatically. Now, again, the premise doesn't give specific scenes where Sam damages artifacts or chooses between them. I'm not claiming that happens. I'm saying the premise creates that tension, and the show's atmosphere makes you feel it. Every object matters. Every object is loaded. So every conflict in this space has an added layer. Rehook. The museum turns every fight into an argument about what deserves to be preserved. That's why this setting is genius. Okay, let's step back and talk about what the show is as a genre hybrid. It's part supernatural thriller, part horror, part hero story, part workplace drama. That last one is sneaky but real. Sam is working. The museum has routines. The building has procedures. The tension comes from those procedures being inadequate for what's happening. Workplace dramas are usually about coworkers, politics, ambition. Here, the coworker is the building. The politics are secrecy and history. The ambition is survival. It's weird, but it works. And that's why the show feels fresh even if the premise sounds familiar. The flavor is specific. Rehook. If you strip away the power, what's left? A man alone doing a job at night in a building that doesn't feel safe. That core is strong. Now, I'm going to build toward a final evaluation. But I'm not delivering the final verdict yet, because we're still in the thick of this, and I want to earn the ending properly. Before I do, I want to address one more common viewer reaction. Is Sam too passive? Because some people will watch a cautious protagonist and call them passive. I don't think he's passive. I think he's careful. There's a difference. A night guard in a dangerous situation should be careful. And the show's realism depends on that. If Sam immediately starts acting like an action hero, the premise loses credibility. His caution is part of why the drama stays grounded. So if you're someone who gets impatient with cautious characters, that's not necessarily a flaw in the show. It might be a mismatch in taste. Rehook. Sometimes the bravest thing a character can do is not rush in. This drama understands that, and it's why the tension feels earned. Now, since this project has strict length requirements, I'm going to keep going deeper rather than rushing to wrap. In the next stretch, I want to talk about the show's rewatch value, its emotional aftertaste, and the specific kind of viewer it will reward. Because I think Satpam Museum Dengan Kekuatan Rahasia is one of those dramas where your first watch is about fear and your second watch is about sadness.